I can get a really good picture of how somebody's business is doing, what their expectations are as far as growing. You can do a really rough model to understand how quickly they're going to grow, what their expectations can be by just using those three numbers.
Quotas, capacity, and planning. Let's say they have a board meeting, they have to set targets for the next year. How do you think founders reverse engineer into these things? It's so good to have you today. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing, Vijay? Thanks for having me.
I I am doing very good, and I am so looking forward to having this conversation. You have garnered so much wisdom in your life being a GTM leader at such amazing companies. I can't wait to hear from you, and I'm sure that the listeners will benefit a ton after listening to this conversation. So, without much further ado, please tell us, who is Jim Fisher?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So I've worked my career in technology for the past 20 plus years. And what's sort of funny about it is that I've started at bigger companies and over time just get to smaller and smaller companies and really sort of settled in the startup space. So out of college, I did programming, worked at Accenture, eventually joined Oracle, moved to the startup world at Cloudera, which I was there from about 50 million, about 300 people to close to 1 billion of ARR. Had this sort of the company bingo because it was everything from, pre-IPO to IPO to merger with our biggest competitor to getting bought out by private equity. So, had a lifetime of different corporate experiences there, but, definitely great learning experience.
Yeah.
So I did that and, really found that I enjoyed the sort of build mode. So I had a bunch of different roles at Cloudera. So I started out on the pre-sale side, eventually moved into customer success and ultimately into sales. And so I took that experience, really enjoyed sort of the build mode. And I joined a Series B company called Tonic AI back at the beginning of, so that was sort of my first experience at a very early stage company and, really learned a lot there. I started to sort of dabble in working with different startup companies and, just I like to say I sort of stumbled into advising or consulting with startup companies. Also spent some time at Red Panda, which is also another early stage data company as well. And since that, I've been, basically working on my own as a early market GTM advisor, fractional CRO, which I really love because I get to talk to and, I find founders so exciting and interesting what they're doing and really helping them sort of build out and grow their business. So really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I know our paths have been crisscrossing ever since our Cloudera times. You've worked and consulted for some of the companies that I have been involved with, and founders just don't run out of enough nice things to say about you, Jim. So you have such a broad spectrum of experience in terms of the size of companies, all within enterprise software, especially in companies that build and sell complex products. So who better to ask this question? You've talked about the three Golden KPIs. I believe they are uh, the the number of first meetings, conversion rate, and average selling price. Why these three?
I can get a really good picture of how somebody's business is doing, what their expectations are as far as growing. You can do a really rough model to understand how quickly they're going to grow, what their expectations can be by just using those three numbers. You also can understand a little bit about I'll call it quality of earnings or revenue that they have as well, like how is go to market working. So that's really one of the first things that I can get like a picture and just sort of understand where the business is at. Also helps me just do a quick diagnosis. Is it a pipeline generation issue that they're trying to solve? Is it a sales execution or what it might be? So it's not the be all and end all, but it's a great starting point to start to dig in and ask more questions, understand how business is doing.
That makes a lot of sense. I know we are going to unpack each of these different topics that you just quickly mentioned, but one of the things that I'm sure you've heard this from many early stage founders is that there is obviously this hunger to kickstart the business. And with that comes this desire to have as many first meetings as possible. What's wrong with that approach?
It's a good question there. And I sort of differentiate the different phases, right? So early stage founders that are just trying to generate product market fit, it's great to get a lot of meetings to figure out what to build. But as you're getting into founder led selling, you do have to start to look at the quality of the meetings. So one of the things that I always look at with the three golden KPIs is, conversion rate, but really digging into that. How many of those first meetings turn into what might be a qualified opportunity? And everybody has different definition, but hey, is there some sort of pain that the product can solve? Do you have some next steps? And you just that's pretty much it. And do you have some sort of path to budget if there's a project or initiative or something like that? And one of the issues is if you don't have that, you're going to spend a lot of cycles just trying to generate interest here. So a lot of wasted times where you could be talking to people that are better fits for your product. So when I look at, hey, how many of your first meetings really convert into opportunities? What I'm sort of looking for that is somewhere, let's say between 40, 60%. And these aren't hard numbers here, but they're just general guidelines. So for example, if somebody is, talking to a lot of people and 1 out of 5 of them or 20% turn into an opportunity, a deeper demo or POC, you're probably talking to the wrong people, right? You should have half the meetings turn into something material, right? If it's too high, like, hey, everything really is an opportunity here. You're probably moving too many things into the next stage here and sort of wasting cycles as well. So you want to be, cognizant of where you spend your time. Obviously, that's important, but it also sets the foundation of what patterns to look for when you start to bring in that first AE to start doing sales outside the founder led. So it's really just about prioritization of time. And also, so you don't get down separate paths as well, that you're trying to build stuff for that prospect that might not be a great fit.
Those are great points, by the way. I also find it very interesting. You not only talk about not having anything less than 40%, but also if somebody tells you that their conversion rate is over 60%, that's probably something to think about too. Because the more I think about who tend to be some of the first meetings that founders get, we're talking about the discovery stage. Many of them tend to be warm intros, right? Most likely friends and family, former colleagues. And you don't want to get it sucked into meeting after meeting after meeting with friendlies without those translating into a material sale. And that is a trap that I have seen some founders fall into. So that's also a great call out.
Yeah, exactly.
Where in all this fits the concept of ICP, Jim? How do you think about that, especially in the early stages?
Yeah, it's a good question. ICP is always a key topic. And look, the first thing I'll say is that where most people fall short is that it's too broad, right? So that is the problem that most people have. They just say, hey, we want to go after large enterprises, or we want to go
Man, who
after,
doesn't?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Which we can talk about. That is like it's a double-edged sword. So it's great to go after the enterprises. You don't want to go too far in that direction. So the first thing I always say to people is like, look, you've got to have a more, tighter definition there for it. And the reason is if you're too wide there, you're going to try to do too many things. Like you just lack that focus, right? You don't have this huge engineering team. You're trying to solve one problem, do it very well. So, you don't want to solve the problem of a lot of different people. But ultimately, the way that I look at that is that it ultimately is like a pattern recognition of what you're trying to do there. And there's also two different aspects to it. There's a qualitative aspect and a quantitative aspect of it as well. And I can talk through a little bit about, how you do the quantitative aspect of it. But the quantitative is when you're a little bit further along, maybe have some customers already that you can use some data to talk about different cohorts of customers. But really, with the qualitative aspect, which I think is really important early on, is just to try to figure out what are the common pain points that people have that turn into those opportunities or ultimately turn into customers, which is, the clear signal that you solved a problem. And just sort of trying to understand, hey, what is the pain that I'm ultimately trying to solve? What is the value that exists, my solution for this customer? What's their role? Because you're just looking for that pattern, right? And there's a lot of different components to ICP. Could be persona, could be role, could be level, but you're looking for those different things that eventually you can say, okay, this is the type of role that I want to go after with this message and this solution, right? So you're ultimately looking for what is the messaging, who are the people to go after, right? That your messaging will resonate with. what is the messaging that you have that, talks to a pain point that they have and that you have a solution. And then ideally, if you have some customers already that are experience value, that you can share that because proof points are the best way really to sell to people as well. So I think it really just starts with looking for those patterns, asking a lot of questions, not just, hey, what feature did you like, but hey, what are you trying to solve? What is the value of it to your business? And once you get answers to those questions, you can sort of back into, hey, what is my ideal ICP? Now, I can also talk about once you start to get some of that data, how you take a quantitative approach to it.
Before we get into that, though, I just wanted to underscore the importance of what you just said when founders are transitioning from this super early stage ICP discovery. They would talk about their ICP in ways that literally fit into LinkedIn's filters, right? So,
Yeah.
company size, what is the title? Maybe they have a few different company names even. Maybe it's 10 or 20 target companies. It has to be more than that if it's really an ICP. So I think that's a very important observation that you made. Yeah, I mean, Jim, if you want to get into the more quantitative aspects, I'm sure that would be super helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the exercises that I'll do with, organizations or companies that I'm working with is like, hey, give me the data that you have on all the opportunities or companies that you've worked with, all the wins, all the losses. And really just get that data. You can start to sort of build out cohorts of, in essence, what is that ICP? Like you said, I thought it was funny that you mentioned there about LinkedIn. Like I always sort of joke about that is like, hey, part of it is like, you know, what you see on the homepage of that company on LinkedIn, but what's that next layer that you can get that you can't find there, which is,
Mm-hmm.
I think really where the value is. But, just to give you a very basic example, like, the very simple starting point is employee size and industry and geography. They're the things that are just, you know, um, table stakes when you start to look at ICP. But let's say you just take that and sort of group those prospects and customers into, we'll just start with employee size, as an example here. And you look at different metrics like win rate, deal size, and, if you have a little bit more history, what is the net revenue retention? And you combine those metrics and you start to get a better picture there because maybe you have a higher win rate with certain types of customers, but bigger deal size or other ones expand. So how do you take those different data points and combine it together? And to give you an example, I like to actually do that is like, hey, what is the current ARR per deal that you've had, right? So that takes in win rate, takes in ASP, takes in net revenue retention. And so one of the companies that I was working with recently is that we broke it down. This was just employee size. We didn't even go into the other dimensions yet. But for 100 employees and below, it basically worked out to about, I think it was like $2,500 dollars of ARR per deal they got. So again, win rate, ASP, NRR. And then if you just get to 500 employees and above, which is not a big difference, it's just
Mm-hmm.
100 to like 500 employees, it was something like $10,000 per deal. So
Wow.
the headline of this story was for the reps, like for every deal that you have for a company 500 employees and greater, it would take you 4 deals with 100 employees or less to equal the value there, right? That's kind of for
Mm-hmm.
win rate, deal size, all that type of thing, right? Like the reps want to drive this like, hey, that's fine, but it's going to be 4 times as much effort to hit your number here. So something like that just becomes like glaringly obvious, like, hey, ICP's got to be 500 employees and above. You still service those people if they come inbound, but if you're going after or trying to go after people, use that number. I had another company that I worked with, and I forget where all the different dimensions were, but they had something like first meetings, like 10% of them would turn into customers, where we were able to, sort of slice and dice it, that it got to the point where the certain size and characteristics of the prospect that it was basically a coin flip. It was 50% that if they just got somebody on the phone, they would turn them into a customer. And so that was just big, bright lights as far as these are the people that you have to go after. So this was combining industry, some of the technology that they had and, other things like that. So you start to get some really interesting insights that people sort of get. But when you see like the numbers with that, like, wait, why would I even, I don't want to say waste your time, but why would I focus my effort on there when this is something that they're just going to have a much easier path to really a happy, successful, good customer.
Wow. Those are all some really good, and I have to say, some stark examples too of how important this next level data is in order to diagnose sales execution, but also to move it to the next level. So, digging deeper into that and into topics like quotas, capacity, and planning, how should founders, so they started there on this path of founder led sales, let's say they have a board meeting, they have to set targets for the next year. How do you think founders have to reverse engineer into these things?
It's a great question. And it's probably, I would say, like the number one issue that I run into with founders where I see that, hey, they're going to get caught up in this. And, just to give you an idea of what that's like, you know, most companies who have a board have some sort of plan. A lot of times it comes from the board like, hey, you're at 3 million last year, you should be at 6 million this year, right? And there's probably good reason for it, but a lot of it is, might be motivated by, hey, to get a best return on this investment, you need to do triple, triple, double, double, or whatever, right? There's other factors that drive that. And, I'll just look at, for example, those three golden KPIs, and I can look really quickly and say, like, hey, I know that you want to grow like $3 million this year, but like you're just going to grow $1 million based on what you have, right? Unless you get three times the number of meetings or you double the size of your deals or you increase your win rate 50%, it's just not going to happen. And not to say that you shouldn't improve your metrics, you absolutely should, but like you're almost counting on something that is very unrealistic or three things happening that are very low probability that just aren't going to happen. So like that's where I like to start with those numbers. Now, you can build in some positive assumptions, right, for these things, but you should have realistic gains in them, right? Like, okay, I'm getting, 50 meetings a month or something like that. To hit my board plan, I'm going to need 70 meetings. Well, I'm going to start an SDR function, or I've got a new channel for marketing or stuff like that. And so just having those assumptions built in and not just agreeing with the plan, I think is key in it. And I think it's, a bit of a back and forth discussion, but I think that just helps you give a baseline just to see what has to happen in the business to hit those targets that are set.
Those are all great points. I particularly love that you pointed out things like, whether you already have a certain program or not, be it a BDR, SDR program, whether you have zero AE or one AE or five AEs, these things actually matter because they have specific implications on the ramp realities. So you're saying founders have to be cognizant of what is the state of the business today, the baseline, and then back into it from what your goals are. That'll give you a good sense of what is possible, what is highly likely, unlikely. So you have a spectrum of where you're likely to land. Knowing that future
Exactly.
isn't perfect and, we all have to work with assumptions.
Exactly. Like I always like to, I forget who said this, but all models are wrong, but some are just better than others, right? It's not
Yeah,
perfect. It just gives you direction there, allows you to ask those other questions. And I think that's key.
for sure. So switching into the topic of GTM leadership, you've been a GTM leader now. Now you're advising, doing fractional roles, and you've been a full-time GTM leader as well. So you've had the spectrum of responsibilities that many founders are thinking to hire GTM leaders for. What is your view of the right time and place for each of these different roles? A full-time GTM leader versus someone that is more fractional versus a GTM advisor?
Yeah, great question. And look, my answer is probably a little bit biased here, being in that space, but I do think there's a lot of value with somebody who's, an expert in the space, right? Or had that experience. So, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. Like, so for example, when a founder is really doing that founder led selling, right? Where it's just them going out there and trying to get the new business, I think that's really up to the founder if they have somebody that's a GTM advisor, right? Like there might be some benefit there. And hey, what's the best way to do discovery? Or customer wants to do a POC, or how do I price this out? Having somebody that you can sort of ask these questions to, I think is very useful. I definitely wouldn't offload that to somebody else, like, hey, have them sort of run sales cycles. It's still got to be founder led because they've got to experience that first to do that. But I think having that is great. Now, they might be able to get some assistance through, their investors or other people as well. But, I think it's really up to the founder, whether they have that advisor or not. So I say that's sort of 50-50. It's up to, different people to what they'd like. What I do recommend is that when they're starting to get out of founder led sales, like the point I usually talk about is like when you're starting to hire somebody from GTM organization. So, and more I'm talking about like sales, not necessarily marketing, but maybe they're hiring an AE or maybe they're hiring an SDR to start to try to scale out a little bit. That's where I recommend having some sort of advisor that, becomes that sounding board because there's so many things that go on, like what's the interview process? What's the profile that I'm looking for? How do I do coaching? How do I know if this person is like doing well? How do I sort of convey my knowledge to them? The example I often talk about is, most founders are product people or engineering people, right? They haven't really done much go to market work before. And so like, how are they going to be able to judge that? It would be the same thing as me, like going and trying to hire, engineering leaders or, doing code reviews or whatever. It's like, I could try my best, but I'm not going to be as good as somebody who's done that for 10 or 15 years or whatever. So just having that person to do that, I think is important. So really that first hire, I think it starts to become critical to have somebody that you can, bounce ideas off, ask the questions as you start to scale up like more than a couple people, what I see happen a lot, and, this is a good problem to have, but the CEO, co-founder is just so busy with a lot of different things. And when you have 3 people or more, like you need to invest at least 50% of the time with them, enabling them, helping out on deals, brainstorming ideas. And if you're the CEO and founder of a company, if you're doing 50% of your time on go to market, you're not doing the other stuff as well. That's, probably trying to grow the company. So that's when a fractional leader, I think, is very helpful. Like you're not big enough yet, hire a VP of sales. It's probably too expensive. Like the return's not as good, but getting somebody who can allocate 1 or 2 days a week to be involved in deals, coach the team, help you build out the assets to start to scale the team. That's a good return. It's better than nothing. And you don't need, full time as well. Once you start to get to like full team size, so I think like 5 to 6 people, and again, it could be a combination of 5 AEs, no SDRs, or 3 AEs, 2 SDRs, whatever that is. I think then you're starting to get into the point that you should look to get a VP of sales. You probably have some sort of consistency in the business. You've hired these people. A fractional person isn't going to be able to give as much time, isn't as invested as if you have a full-time VP of sales, CRO, whatever that role is. So very rough estimates, but that's what I've sort of seen where there's value to bringing in somebody with that experience.
Those are all very helpful heuristics here, Jim. I know you also have an opinion on who should be the first GTM leader that a startup should bring. So let's hear that too.
Yeah, and like I said, a little bit of this is biased, right? Like, coming from the role here. But, and when I think of GTM, like there's, everybody probably defines a little bit differently, but I sort of think of like sales, marketing, customer success, potentially pre-sales as well. So let's just say like the 3 different types of leaders that you could bring in from a go-to-market leadership role or customer success, marketing, and sales. I would say, there's some cases to be made for marketing first because marketing takes a while to get ramped up. Like if you're getting the message out there, you're testing stuff out. So, there's some cases that if you want to have like an inbound flow ready for reps that you hire a marketing leader first. Now, you could also hire some people who can do it on a more tactical level. So I wouldn't argue with somebody if they said, hey, I'm going to hire a marketing leader first. But if I had to choose amongst those 3, I would say like a sales leader first. And the reason I think that is why they won't be experts in the other functions is that I think that they are often involved in those enough that they could sort of step in as needed, right? So, hey, this is the type of messaging or demand generation I might need for my sales team. Or, hey, this is how we should service the customers to make sure that they're successful, handle renewals, expansions, things like that. Where I think it's much tougher if you get like a marketing leader or customer success leader. Like there are people that could do it, but they don't have as much exposure to, let's say, the nitty gritty of sales and prospecting and all that fun stuff there. Again, it's a little bit of my bias, but I
But
do
that's an
think just from what
excellent.
I see.
Yeah, no, I think it's founded on real observation, right? Especially in terms of how much involved some of these other functions are in sales and vice versa. Super helpful. Now, no conversation is going to be complete, without talking about AI. And just
Yeah.
before I hit the record button on this podcast, we were talking about some AI functionality. So let's hear it. Your views on the good, the bad, where you've seen AI to be helpful and maybe not so helpful, especially in early stage sales.
Yeah, it's great. I am very bullish on AI helping out go-to-market teams, and particularly sales teams in general. Now, look, you can play it out like 20 years from now, like, will you have sales reps or is it just, agents sort of talking to each other? Like, okay, I don't know how that's going to play out. But in the next few years, the way that I look at it is like, I see AI as being so helpful. One of the companies I'm spending a lot of time with does a lot of, it's really about AI automation of business processes. And one of the primary use case is sales automation. And to me, it was sort of like a light bulb went off when I saw some of these use cases, for the reps and really for the sales leaders as well. And so the way that I sort of look at this is at the end of the day, people buy from people, particularly enterprise sales. Like if you're buying something, very transactional or a tool, you can go to a website, different story. But, let's just talk about a world where you have some sales led growth type of business. People
Six-figure
buy from
sales as an example, right?
Exactly, exactly. It's such a hard job to do because there's so many different factors, right? It's not like a lot of other things where, it's very cookie cutter, right? You have different prospects with different needs. And what AI is so good at is that really just gives you that guidance. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that I really love about AI that I think is great is like, sales has this idea of what's the status of an opportunity. You fill out MedPick, BANT, like, all these different terms. And every rep is different with that. It's always a bit of overhead to do that. Where now with the call transcriptions that we have, like you can take that and fill it out, automatically. So you don't have sales leaders bugging reps about it. You don't have reps wasting time filling out this information. It's high quality because it's based on actual data. So I've seen this myself of just like the AI can just create great summaries of opportunities about what's missing. What do we have here? But the next level is that it can also just help train people like, hey, you don't really have a path to budget here. Here's some questions that you could ask in the next conversation. Or here's some points that keep on coming up amongst your potential like ICP, like pain points that might not have been obvious. It's that pattern recognition there as well. So the way I almost see it in the next couple of years is that you still very much are going to have sales reps, sales leaders involved, but they're going to be given direction every step of the way, taking best practices from the best reps, from, the best customers a company might have, like all that knowledge to help them become a better seller. And that doesn't mean just, wheeling and dealing and, convincing customers we have to buy, but really being able to address their questions and helping them get through the process as well. So I think buyers will have a better experience because they'll have more educated sellers, more tailored to their needs as well. So I think that AI is going to have a tremendous like impact to selling and also to buying over the next few years. And there's a lot of tools out there that I've seen some really cool stuff that there's not anything that's put it together yet, but a lot of cool, sort of one-off tools that are doing some really interesting stuff.
So you're definitely a techno optimist, and I love the use cases and the scenarios that you mentioned. So if I were to summarize what you said, I think what you're saying is that AI can help improve, especially in early stage, especially with even human interactions. So much of what happened versus how we humans actually processed it, there can be a disconnect. Some people, especially founders, can have happy years. And they might walk out of a meeting thinking, okay, that is awesome. That is going to convert. Whereas the AI might tell us after reviewing that transcript that actually there is no path forward. They don't have a budget, or there are too many red flags, and there's a mismatch between this ICP and all these other ICPs who actually converted. So I think what you're saying is that in that specific instance, as an example, AI can be really helpful for us in advancing our business using more objective and consistent ways of interacting with prospects and customers. So I really love that.
Exactly. Can I give you one more example that I
Be
like,
great.
even,
Please.
sort of how that translates to helping the customers as well? So one of the use cases that I've seen a lot is like, okay, you fill out your CRM system, which is sort of internal, but it's also a great mechanism for coaching and best practices. And so what's interesting about this is that you can build these, coaching agents that can listen to call and give feedback based on best practices. And it's really good to go through the exercise about what are we actually looking for in this call. So, for example, one of the companies where I did this recently, like with anything you sell, it's very important to come to the value. And sometimes people just sort of skip over that because they're so excited to talk about features, where we realized it was very important to understand the value, not just for us, but for, the prospect, because they need to sell it internally. So there's a couple questions that we added to the coaching framework that we looked for with the reps. So they would get feedback about that. They would ask questions. And now the reps are better about asking those questions that are really, that are useful not only to the company, to the company selling the product, but also to the end customer. Because you say, hey, based on this, like what you've talked about, it sounds like this is the value here, right? Do you agree or not? And so it not only helps internally to figure out what is the value, how should the company price it, but, aligning so the customer realizes that as well. So that's just really scratching the surface, I think, of a lot of these things. But, it just forces you to be a little bit thoughtful in it. And, it just brings out very new, interesting insights.
For sure. That's a great example, by the way. So let's switch topics. Let's let's move into a topic which I think you've encountered quite a bit, especially in your advisory capacity.
Hmm.
So companies, founders, maybe investors calling you when they think their startup has a scaling issue. We have the best product, it can scale to hundreds of millions of users, customers, what have you. But the thing that isn't working is sales and marketing. I'm sure you've heard that line many, many times before, but you just don't buy that, right? You don't look at the
Yeah.
situation and immediately agree, okay, it's a sales and marketing issue. So how do you approach those things?
Well, so this is interesting. We're going full circle here, going back to what we talked about earlier. And, if you can't tell already, like I'm a very data driven person here, but a lot of it just really starts with like, do you have the data or the analytics, right? A lot of people sort of go on gut, but you start to ask like questions like the golden KPIs that I talked about earlier. Most founders don't know. I mean, I don't even think I could count on one hand, like the founders that I talked to ask those basic questions where they know off the top of their head, right? What win rate, how many meetings they're getting, that type of thing. So they just don't know. They have a hunch. And I think the key is like to start with that data. So I'll give you a really, simple example of something we talked about earlier, where I talked about that first meeting conversion rate, like how many meetings turn into opportunities. Well, there's this one company that like they had extremely low conversion rate. It was about, 33% or something like that. And, they figure, oh, the sales reps aren't selling, like they're like not following up, like it's a sales issue, right? But when we unpacked it, what was happening is the messaging. Now, this is marketing, but could have just as easily been, product side, is that the messaging that they got people to sign up for meetings, the inbound was just off, right? The product didn't do that. Now, should the product have done it? They add it or whatever, but people were confused. They were just looking for functionality that didn't happen. So it wasn't about rep follow up or a sales execution issue. It was actually about, hey, the messaging was off with this as well. So, that's something that I think is just important to get, understand the data. And again, all it really does, it allows you to ask more questions here. But I think that just sort of gives you, again, whether talking to the board and what's the plan for next year, what are the areas that need to be fixed? And every company has some sort of issues that need to be fixed or stuff that needs to be optimized. So really the first thing I always do is just help people set up that foundation so that they can understand the data. Like it's basically just getting a map so you know that, where you're at, where you need to go. So I think that's really the first part. And then you can figure out from there. It's pretty easy to dig into. Is it a sales problem? Is it a marketing problem? Is it a product or engineering problem as well?
I love that example that you gave, Jim, very, very much, because when I transitioned from being an operator to VC, it used to absolutely frustrate me to walk into board meetings where it would just be that, the top line numbers, they don't look good. And then immediately the conversation would jump into who should we fire, who should we hire, or
Yeah,
which different accounts we have to get into. And it would blow my mind that we don't have all the data to actually come to any diagnosis whatsoever. So I think that just that recognition is so important, certainly for investors, but sometimes even for founders, because especially for those people who haven't sold or built a business before, it's so easy, especially when you have more than one person in sales or marketing, to just assume, oh, that person is the problem. They are it. We just need different people or more of those same people. It's
yeah,
so often that I have seen people jump into that conclusion, but it often doesn't help fix the issue because you don't know what the issue is in the first place. So I think
exactly.
that is such an important piece that you called out as missing.
This, and I've seen this more times than I'd like. What I think the shame about is like obviously, it's very important for the founder and the company, be successful long term and grow like that. But it also impacts the people they hire. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen companies where, like I said, sort of go into some of the math right away. I said, you have 3 reps, you can barely support one, right? Like it's just not realistic to think. So these
Hmm.
people are hired, right? They're not making money, like they're probably gonna leave, like just the impact of the company and those individuals that the company just didn't have that background. And again, best of intentions, right? Like they thought
Yep.
stuff was going well because they had some positive signals there. But I think that's really important because, I've also seen at times where like I look at them like, you need to hire more people, right? Like you guys are doing
Yep.
well. Like, grab market share while you can. Like, I get it's not perfect here, but stuff's going well. But it really is important, especially on the negative side, right? Like that's the worst thing I like to say is like, yeah, you have too many people in this team. Like you just can't support them. Like you can do something about it now, but not good things are going to happen soon.
And since you brought it up, I think it'd be also good to unpack the positive side a little bit here, right? So clearly, revenue is not the leading indicator for founders when they know GTM is working or not. So then what is, from your experience, what has been the leading indicator to know that GTM is beginning to work and so it makes sense to scale that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I think it's hard to pinpoint exactly one thing, but what I'll say is consistency, right? So, for example, and what do I mean by that is that I've seen companies that, hey, they get that one or two big deal. And, it's like Bill Gates walks into a bar, the average, wealth goes up, like whatever. And they think, hey, that's good. But, you can't sustain that. Like, you're not always going to get those big deals. But if you're consistently getting, from one channel, like new meetings and new prospects, and they're converting at a fairly consistent rate and they're renewing or expanding or whatever over time. It might not be this explosive growth, but it's pretty consistent. So it's sort of that consistency that you see. And again, it just might be the meetings that you're getting and that might grow. So it really has to be a lot of these things. Like you could get a lot of meetings, but they're not converting, or you could get a lot of meetings turn into customers and they're not renewing or expanding. And those are problems as well. So it's not one thing, but I think it's really you're looking at those cohorts and they're just becoming more consistent, more consistent. It'll never be exactly the same. Like that's sort of the nirvana to have. But as long as you're starting to see some of that, not just get these blips out there, I think that's the important thing.
I love how simple your message was about that. It seems to boil down to one word, and that is consistency. I love
That's
that.
right.
It's not as simple to get to that point, but that's what you want to look for. Cool.
Yeah.
Let's jump into some advice that you have for founders. You've worked with many, you've seen some people do some really good work as it relates to go to market, and some people, make mistakes. What is a piece of advice that you have for founders, especially for their first 10 customers?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I think, like every founder I've worked with is pretty good about this. And I think it's the number one thing. It's just you got to make them successful, right? So do whatever you need to do to make that first group of customers successful. It's not scalable, right? But you got to get the, first group there. But so I think most people do that very well. The less obvious answer here is just really understand like those other things around it. Like when I talked about ICP, right? Like
Hmm.
what was, people are very interested in their product, how people like it. They're just happy that they love it. But what was the problem that they were trying to solve? Like, why were they doing something now? Why are they willing to pay for it? So, just really understanding at the end of the day, people buy stuff because they're trying to improve their business or trying to remove a pain. Really understand that. I think that's so critical. Like, we all get hung up on what our product can do and how it compares to the competitor, but I still think the most important thing is to understand how it adds value to what the customer is doing, because that is the biggest, factor when it comes to how much you can charge, if you can renew, if you can expand with the customer. So usually it takes a couple extra questions, but if people like your product, they're willing to share that. They're willing to help out, and allows you to be a better partner to them as well.
That's a great piece of advice. So you're saying actually take the time to do that and do it well. And
Yeah.
along those lines, what are some mistakes that you see founders do?
Well, I would say, again, it's from my side, but it's not hiring a GTM advisor or fractional CRO. I say that, tongue in cheek, but I do think that that is a mistake that people make. Like, I would say that 40% of my job at times is really just educating founders on how go to market works. Like, there's some idiosyncrasies like with go to market and selling about how people buy or they sell or expectations. See a lot of founders want to have like first principles, and they're completely right about some things, but sometimes like that's just not the way that enterprises buy or sellers them on that. And what I tell people is like, look, I get it. You want to try to innovate and do something new and improve, but I would put that innovation to your product and engineering. I wouldn't necessarily try to innovate on how you do go to market or how you do pricing or something like that. You're just going to create confusion with it. So that's where I think an advisor or, fractional CRO is helpful, is they can just help you avoid those landmines. So, you don't have to fix something later or miss out on some opportunity.
Well, I guess I want to add one caveat there, which is unless founders think just like they're vibe coding, they could do vibe selling. I don't know if that's a thing, but until we get to that point, you do need real humans to help selling to other real humans.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. They're not there yet. Do that, but maybe someday there will be.
Yeah. Jim, this was such a fantastic conversation. There is so much that you talked about, and there's a lot to understand and implement. I think it's a very actionable conversation. Thank you for sharing your wisdom on all things go to market.
Well, thanks for having me, Vidya. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Okay.